From the studios in San Diego, California, this is Mixed Up Sports on MixedUpSports.com, powered by Twitch.tv. Here on this Football Friday, it is the 22nd day of 2016. My name is Frank Marchese, Cruiser Ryan to my left, Nick Sexton to my right. Boys, how you doing today?
Pretty good.
Doing good.
And as I said, it's conference championship week here in the NFL. And the headlines all week have been the final clash, or what many people feel will be the final clash of the legends Brady and Manning and the two powerhouses in the NFC, Arizona versus Carolina.
For the first game, for Patriots versus the Broncos, this is everybody's been talking about it all week. It's been hyped up to the point where everybody understands that this is a rivalry. However, with that being stated, it hasn't been like that these last couple of meetings where it seemed like it's only been, Tom Brady on top. However, when they did play this year, we know that Peyton Manning was benched or he was out by an injury. We had Brock Osweiler starting. It was Broncos win, in which they hope they can repeat this time. But if we go to the normal rivalry between the two of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play this game, it's going to be a good one. So far Brady's on top with it all, leading, and even if we went by this season's standards, it's not really much of a rivalry when you have Tom Brady, who has 36 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, whereas you have Peyton Manning with 9 TDs and 17 interceptions. I feel like it's going to go the same way,
Yeah, I mean it's a crazy rivalry that's been going on for as long as this in this modern era at least, and two of the best quarterbacks to ever do it. But wish you could say the same for Peyton Manning, at least this year, as he is, like you've mentioned, he hasn't been himself at all. And I mean, at this point, I feel like he's all he is to this Denver team as a game manager, because he's not doing them any favors as far as leading his team to victory. It's their defense that is keeping them in the games. And so, while a lot of people are hyping up Brady versus Manning, it's going to be a great game between two of the best quarterbacks of all time. I mean, you got to think that this is a team sport, so it's not just Brady versus Manning. I know everyone's hyping it up like that, but I mean, Brady can't beat Tom Brady alone. The defense with Peyton Manning, maybe, and it'll be definitely a good game to watch, in my opinion, with the powerhouse New England offense versus the powerhouse Denver defense.
And when you think about it, I mean, I think it's an absolute travesty that this game is going to be the afternoon game and not the prime time game. When you have two names as big as Brady versus Manning, this is what, the 18th, 17th, 18th time they're going to meet in their careers. It's going to be the 5th time they're going to meet for an AFC championship. This is the kind of game when it's going to be the last time two quarterbacks that have defined a generation and have made a living playing in the AFC championship game and in the Super Bowl. This is the game that you put in prime time. I'm sorry. This is the prime time game. It's not the lead in to another game. This is the game of the week.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's also, if you think about it, like with Peyton Manning getting this old and Tom Brady, still good, but still has a couple years left on him. This could be the final possible meetup between these two, depending on if Peyton Manning decides to retire after the season or if he decides to continue. Whether or not they get to the same point, we don't know. But this could theoretically be the last time these two meet in this big of stage. So I completely agree with you on that statement about how this should be the primetime game. But the same token, you have the other game with, Cardinals and Panthers, which Cardinals at 15-1 in regular season and, destroying the Seahawks the way they did up until, like we said last week, that they just completely gave out and, gave it opportunity for a comeback. It's still one of those games where it's two great offenses against each other for that game, but at the same token, it's still two great, players, future Hall of Famers going at it this time. So you can argue either way. They can both go primetime, but I agree with you on this one that it should be, Peyton Manning versus Tom Brady.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why they. I can see the reasoning as to why Carolina and Arizona is up on prime time. But I mean, when you have possibly the last meeting ever between two of the greatest to ever do it, you gotta put that game on prime time. That's the game everyone wants to see, and I mean that it's like you said, it's a travesty they're not on prime time here.
And I mean, just getting into the game, you guys have both mentioned it. The high-powered offense for New England between Brady and Edelman, Brady and Gronkowski, Brady and Amendola, who, by the way, was fined for his hit last week. It's an undisclosed amount. Rather, it hasn't been announced. The projection, though, is it's going to be $23,152. That's the projected fine for Amendola for his hit last week in the second quarter. Um, the high-powered offense versus the high-powered defense. Denver's defense is the reason why they were undefeated for so long. Peyton Manning was not the reason this year. What many people may forget, Manning was not the reason that Denver was undefeated for so long. It was how good that defense behind it was.
Peyton Manning was the reason they almost lost those games. I mean, you think back to the Browns game between the Broncos and the Browns. That game came down to the wire because Peyton Manning threw what, like 3 interceptions? And it was just the fact that the Browns couldn't capitalize on those interceptions, which, like you mentioned, without this defense, they would not have been undefeated. And if they didn't have the defense they did, this would be a much different story.
And with this whole thing about the defense saving them, Peyton Manning hasn't been the same guy, obviously. I forgot what game it was, but the same game that he had set the all-time leading for passing yardage. Kansas City ended up being his worst game with what I want to believe it was 4 picks. So
yeah, that was...
it's a little sad to think that this is not the same player who we love to see in competitive shootout games. So obviously that this team is obviously going to be saved by the defense, and if they can step up this week, it's going to be a good game. But if they end up not being able to stop this, this offense that you said was led by Tom Brady with Gronkowski and Edelman, we saw what happened last week to Kansas City. It could very much happen again, and with not the same Peyton Manning you're used to, if that ends up happening on defense, well, your offense is not going to have your back as much either.
And when you look back at what these two teams did this year, both of them 12 and 14. Broncos first in the AFC, Pats second. You remember these two teams met in New England on the 29th of November, with Peyton Manning at the helm for that game, and they won. They won it in overtime. That was, I believe, that was the. Hold on one second. That was the. I'm sorry. They had lost. They had lost 2. Then they beat Chicago by 2, and then it was the New England game. So Manning has beaten Brady this season already.
I thought Brock Osweiler was starting that game.
Against New England?
Yeah, Brock Osweiler led him to beat New England.
Was it?
Yeah, because it was
Oh, well, never mind. I do. No, you're right. Well, anyway, my point stands. The Broncos have still beaten the New England Patriots this season. That was in New England. Now they just got to do it again.
And it's going to be a good game, but in the same token, we still have one other game to figure out, and that's Arizona Cardinals in Charlotte, North Carolina against the Panthers. So with Cam Newton being a high-powered quarterback, and and their entire team being so stacked this year, and Cardinals, we saw it last week. They started off extremely slow and ended up pulling it together with Larry Fitzgerald, who's a future Hall of Famer without a doubt. But it's going to be a completely scoring game unless we see Carolina's defense step up like they did last week against Seattle. It's it's gonna be a good game to watch.
Yeah, I mean the Panthers obviously they have a great defense led by Luke Kuechly, Josh Norman, and Thomas Davis. I mean, you go on and on with this defense. Then Cam Newton has stepped up also, so it can. So it'll be definitely an interesting game. But what I want to bring up here is about Cam Newton. Now, there's been a for elite quarterbacks, right? I'd consider Cam Newton an elite quarterback, but uh, I would not consider him an elite passer. The fact that he's a dual threat quarterback makes him that elite quarterback. Because if he was a pocket passer with the throwing accuracy he has now, he would not make it in this league. Because granted, he has the most total touchdowns this year, or he has an extreme amount of total touchdowns, but a lot of them have been on the ground. There's been a lot of
49, I believe.
yeah, there's been a lot of overthrows and just I, as a passer, I don't like Cam Newton, but as a quarterback, I think he's a elite quarterback.
I definitely say he's an elite quarterback. I don't think there's any argument, especially having just what they were 4-12 last season somewhere. They were down and out, wondering, oh, is Cam Newton going to bring this team back? Is Cam Newton still as good? And then he go out and do this, a 15-1 season, and then completely destroying in the first round, completely dismantling the reigning, defending NFC champions. Um, I mean, Newton. I really don't think it is any doubt that Newton is an elite quarterback. I mean, the guy had 3,800 yards this season, 35 touchdowns, 10 picks, quarterback rating of just under 100. Newton has led this team back to where it should be.
Yeah, and you're right about that. He also has some help too, so it's not just him. You got Jonathan Stewart, who we saw last week, on one drive had, I believe it was 72 or 75 yards rushing alone. You know,
The same Jonathan Stewart who didn't do anything until after I took him off my fantasy team, but I'm not bitter.
well, naturally, it's this team is not just, one player. Like we could talk about the other team where it was like, oh, all we talked about was Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, and granted they have targets, but it's the same token, these guys are a complete team, and the best thing about them this year is that they are the least injured team in the league, which this season was all about injuries. You had Edelman, who was out for the Patriots. You had Jordy Nelson, who was out for the Packers. I had to mention that because, of course, I'm still upset not to mention it. It's still, they are a complete team. Defensively, unstoppable. We see week in and week out where it's interceptions and then it's interceptions all the way to the house, as we saw last week. They get to the quarterback, they make plays. This team is without a doubt, like I said, the most complete team. And whether they can keep it going until next year, I don't know. But at this point in time, they have, I believe, the best chance out of any team here to go all the way.
Yeah, I mean this Panthers team, like we mentioned before, he's definitely got some help, and I think that some of the stats that represent Cam Newton might be a little bit misleading based on how many deep balls he's thrown at Ted Ginn. Not taking away anything about his season, he's had a great season, um, easily the best of his career, and I mean with this defense, pretty much I won't say that not any quarterback can win, but this defense is nearly unstoppable. I mean, you have Luke Kuechly who scored 7 crucial points on that pick six from Russell Wilson, and that made the difference in with a win or a loss. I mean, he's had plenty of one of the best coverage linebackers in the NFL, probably the best linebacker overall in the NFL. It's ridiculous how good this kid really is as far as a linebacker.
One thing we are forgetting to point out here is the fact that this is going to be the first ever playoff meeting between two Heisman winning quarterbacks. Carson Palmer won it for USC back in 2002, and Cam Newton won it for Auburn just 5 years ago, 2010. And if you look, you look at the team splits. We put so much of Carolina's season on the success of Cam Newton and how well Cam Newton's played. You know where Carolina's ranked in passing offense this season? 24th.
Jeez.
Compare that to the Arizona Cardinals, who are ranked second. It's definitely. It's going to be a very interesting game, and everyone I've spoken to, I personally think it's going to be a walk for Carolina, but I've heard a lot of people say that they think Arizona is going to pull this game out.
I mean, this Arizona team, you can't sleep on them because they finished what 13-3, 14-2, something like that. It's granted they lost Tyrann Mathieu, who was one of the who just broke out this season. But I mean, still this defense. You got Dwight Freeney, who's come back and had a great season after almost retiring to being a key part of this Arizona defense. I mean, you got Patrick Peterson and Rashad Johnson. I mean, there's a lot of pieces on this defense that can really put in work. And I think that if the name of the game for this game is if the Cardinals can stop the Panthers' rushing attack. Because over the season, the Carolina Panthers, they have the highest amount of rushing yards per game in the NFL. Like you said, their passing offense, not so much. Their passing offense isn't the best. But if the Cardinals can stop this run game, which has proven to be a difficult task, as has been shown by the Seahawks, I don't think they haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher for quite some time. I think past over a year until they met up with the Carolina Panthers in the playoffs. So you might think it'll be a blowout, Frankie, but I think I'm with the group that thinks it'll be a great game, and it'll be interesting to see how Carson Palmer reacts. Because I think that the problem was in the Packers game that was his first playoff win. So I think he's gotten over the hump, and now he'll be able to really, play like the Carson Palmer that we've seen over this season.
And you took the words right out of my mouth, Nick. I was going to bring up the fact that he has that pressure lifted off his shoulders after he got that first playoff win. But this is not a bad offense. Like we say, they're going against a great defense, but they're not a bad offense. This is a offense versus a defense that I wanted to see all season. They have Carson Palmer at the helm. When you got receivers like Fitzgerald, Brown, and Floyd, they have running backs like David Johnson. They possibly, not entirely sure yet, but they may have Chris Johnson back in the lineup, or he may be coming back by Super Bowl if they happen to move on. But this is a great offense. They have a great offensive line that's been proven that all season long. It's a team that's not by any means, a fluke in the fact that they're here. This is a game that, like I said, you can argue that it could still be prime time, whether or not you want it to be prime time. I know, Frankie, that you have stated, and I have stated it too, that I'd rather have the other one. But in the same sense, this is two teams that felt like the most complete teams this year. Granted, I feel Panthers had, the more overall stature with, being 15-1, but the same, all around, it's going to be a good game. And I agree with you, Nick, that I'm in the group where it could be close, and it could go either way, honestly.
All right, we will get back to these games. We will get to the picks a little later on in the program. But we will take a break, and we'll be right back when we return. A true underdog story out of the NHL when we return back after this. Don't go away.